Yep. Hello everyone. Thanks, thanks for coming. I can see a lot of faces, so everybody fresh after the party, I guess. And it's 4 o'clock, so yeah, you made it. First question, because I gotta skip a few slides because I didn't expect such introduction. But first question from me to you guys, like raise your hand if you're currently working in Scrum. Okay, so I guess majority, and I guess the others are in a bit different approach. So I'll try to basically answer those questions that were in the description. But as you probably all know, the answer is frequently it depends, right? So it will be a lot of this in the talk. So I will skip this. Feel free to scan the QR code for my LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect, it will be at the end of the presentation as well. So why this presentation? So some time ago, one of the developers that I've been working with in one of the teams asked me this question, like why we cannot just work like we did, like why are we introducing Scrum? Why even the fuss, right? At the time being, as far as I recall, I probably remembered with, I probably reminded him like bullet points about, hey, why this methodology is really good for us, how it solves our problems, etc. Like trying to convince him rationally to the change, basically, that we've been doing, to the change I've really believed in, right? But this question stayed with me, and it was kind of an inspiration for this talk and to basically think outside of the box a bit on that matter. So before we jump into Scrum itself, I would like to talk a bit about the methodology choice itself. So, like, if you think for a second about the beginnings of a project or a team or a small company, because, and that's maybe a disclaimer worth noting, that majority of the stuff that I'm talking about is not really targeted for large-scale teams with a lot of feature teams, a lot of Scrum teams. This is a bit different stuff, and at least not stuff that I have a lot of experience with. So if you think about when you begin something, when you start something, it does not start with, hey, we're going to use Scrum, but now let's figure out what to do with it, right? It starts with, you want to do something. So, hey, let's create this great post-apocalyptic action RPG, or let's create a different game. You have an idea. You have an idea for what you're going to do. And this is actually the start and the core and the top priority on your list. So then if you think, okay, we have the idea, we have the idea of what to do. Now, what do you need to actually start to work? You need first list of things to be done. Obviously, this is a big statement, right? You cannot really list all of the stuff that you're going to do. But you're going to probably define some KPIs for the project. And by KPIs, this is a nice statement. The features that you care about the most, right? So this is a post-apocalyptic game, so it has to look awesome, right? It has to have the feel of the post-apo. You can basically bullet point those things. And the next thing you need is just simple priorities. Okay, we have the features. Now let's think of in what order it makes sense to implement them, right? And this is the essence. And maybe this is kind of trivial thing, but I feel that many times, and including Scrum implementations as producers or as just people that are organizing work of our teams and of our companies, etc., we forget about those crucial essence, right? That, for example, the methodology itself, it's not there just like to be, right? It's there to make a project with it. So it should allow us to work more efficiently and not just stumble upon issues all the time. So it is there to help. So now, if you try to choose a methodology, what problems you're trying to solve. This is actually one of the first questions I think should be stated. And in game development, at least in those projects that I've been in, those 3 points were like main points that we were trying to solve with introducing specific methodology, or we may say with introducing Scrum. So first one is chaotic development. So everyone knows about it. In game development, there is a lot of chaos, basically, because it's a creative matter to do a game. And it's really tricky, in my opinion, to draw the line between creativeness and dynamic changes and chaos, right? If somebody knows the solution, hit me up after the talk, because so far I didn't find it. Regarding chaos, also I would encourage you to think, what's the source of the chaos in your project, right? Because it depends on company, it depends on project, on teams, etc. But the source of chaos, not only one probably, can be in different places. And it's not so simple that you will just fix the chaos with introducing methodology, because it's much more complex. I will get into chaos stuff a few times in a talk, but for now let's leave it as it is here. So second point is scale. So we started as a small team. You started as a small team. Now you want to scale up. So let's assume you're not using any specific methodology. You just have some task somewhere. You're working on stuff, and now you need more people. You need to basically scale up. So the first default, I would say, or generic approach is, okay, we need to find a cookbook. We need to find a template. How do we scale up? Okay, we have Scrum. It has sprints, teams. Now let's go, stick it to the team, and it will be fine. So for some of the implementations, of course, it will work. For some of the team, it will work. But I encourage you to look at your teams and company and think how you could scale up with your current approach. With current approach, I don't mean just let's leave everything the same and just scale up magically, but try to pinpoint problems that are basically preventing you from scaling and apply really narrow solutions to them, and try to start with this. Last point of this slide, lack of reasonable low-level and mid-level planning. This is something inherent to chaos, in my opinion, and I like to think about this I like to think about team as a machinery in a way. You have gears in a machinery, right? And you have certain ratios in a machinery between gears. And the high-level gear is the biggest gear in a machinery. One spin of the biggest gear is like several spins of the mid-level gear. And the low-level gear is even tens or hundreds spins, right? So one change at the top of the project, one change at the top of the vision, for example, can introduce massive changes here. So this is also something we are trying to harness using specific methodology. Second point to consider when choosing one is how it fits into dynamics of your company. I will get into more details about Scrum and its dynamics further on, but every methodology that you use has certain dynamics. And if you're out of fit here, if you have a misfit, you will get basically a lot of drawbacks from this. 2 points to consider regarding dynamics is, for example, how frequent changes do you need? Do you need to experiment? Do you have game directors in a project that are very creative directors that play the game twice a week, and they play the game, I don't know, on Sunday, and Monday morning they have brilliant ideas about what to introduce in the project? So do you need this? And will you benefit from the new cadence? So this is kind of a post-mortem point to this aspect. So getting into the Scrum itself, I will not go through the theory. I think everyone is more or less familiar with the methodology. I would like to just point out one thing regarding the theory that I think we pretty frequently skip again in the heat of managing the teams, managing tasks, and all of this stuff, trying to get to figure this out. And those are the pillars of Scrum. So they are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. I like to think about those with an example in my mind. We have dailies, right, in Scrum, but probably if somebody is not using Scrum, you have dailies either way. Daily is a place where there is transparency. Why? Because there are all team members, or at least all key team members, to be in sync with the project. And I assume you have some kind of place where you keep the tasks, let's say backlog, for the sake of using like Scrum naming. You have a backlog of issues. So everyone is aware of what to do in a project, and everyone is aware of what everybody in the team is doing. So you have a transparency. That allows you to do inspection. So basically, when I'm on the daily and I have my friend, my colleague near me that is an artist, and I'm a programmer, and I hear that he will start to do assets for the feature that I've been working on, and I know it's not ready yet, I can inspect this and say, hey, whoa, this shouldn't be done yet. I'm not yet ready, or this is your work will be lost. So this inspection allows you to adapt and allows you to fix the problem. And like I said, many times we jump into fixing those implementation issues along the lines like, I don't know, fixing our Jira, etc. And we forget about those baselines. So I would also encourage you to think if your Scrum implementation actually utilizes or benefits from those pillars. Because in the essence, in theory, that's the baseline of the methodology. So now I will get into certain aspects of Scrum and what problems I observed with those aspects and what are maybe the causes of the problems or potential solutions, if I have some to share with you. In terms of roles, we have development team, product owner, and Scrum Master. I put stakeholders here in parentheses. Stakeholders are not a role in Scrum, right? But they exist in the environment. And I think it's also many times something that we really forget about. So we focus on the development team. The stakeholders are different based on the project and on the company you have. Like, they are maybe game directors, they are maybe C-level people, but usually they are high flyers, right? So they are not really really close to the project and to daily development. And I think their involvement and basically how we handle their involvement is crucial. Starting with the dev team, few problems here. Lack of skills in the team. So I would say, unlike the default kind of, if we can say it like this, software development, in game development we have a lot of specialized skills. We have developers, right, coders, but oh my, you have gameplay coders, tools coders, UI, audio, VFX, graphics. Like, there is a lot of specializations. Of course, some of those can be joined, but basically you need to have a lot of skills in a team in order for the team to be able to provide a nice increment to the game. Assuming that you have a team that does increments on the game, basically, like, kind of think of it like kind of a vertical slice increments for the game. Because here, if you think of scaled Scrum and a lot of teams working on different parts of the game, then it gets narrowed down. But basically, if you don't have skills in a team, if you don't have proper people in the team, you'll have to reach out somewhere else, and this creates dependency. And if you have a dependency, this can create frustration in the team and basically being unable to act because they need to do something and they need to ask for help from outside. So try to keep teams very self-sufficient. The teams I usually worked with were like programmers, artists, QA, designers, really like compact, nice size, let's say, teams, about 10 of people, and they could iterate on the game basically without having any need for separate, let's say, support from the outside. Avoiding specialization. Scrum tells us, okay, theory of Scrum. Okay, developers in the team are basically interchangeable. If you lose a developer or if you need to change assignment to the team, it should be done with as little, decrease of efficiency, right? So, sure, great. Try to use that with a team that you have just one graphics programmer inside, and you just lost him, right? It's you cannot avoid specialization in game dev. You obviously can share some duties, but I think this is a thing specific to game dev industry, that you will have specialized members in the team, and you basically cannot avoid it. So this, for example, influences how you estimate. Like if there is only one programmer that knows the best how to do stuff in graphics, probably he will know the best how to estimate the tasks. And the last one, don't present the methodology to your team. Involve them in decision. So all those questions that we've been through at the beginning of the talk, sit with them, think about the problems that there are. Maybe they have some ideas how to fix it, and you'll just fix it in a moment, right? But involve them into this, let them know what's going off, and also let them know about different perspectives, right? Because programmer has a much different perspective than producer that has to handle a lot of different stuff. Or even, obviously, a different perspective from like game director, who, for example, can have much different approach. Problems with product owner. Oh my, product owner is a really hard role to do at all. And in game dev, I think it's just, as majority of the stuff, it's even harder. So the problems that I've encountered with product owners is, first, unavailability. So in my opinion, product owners should be very close to the game and to the team. If product owner is unavailable, basically, she cannot answer the questions of the team, and there are always questions, right? You can only refine and plan as good as it's possible, but then when you implement, there are questions and there will be questions. So if the product owner is really unavailable, and I will get to this, why this may happen in a second, this may really hinder your performance. Second point, detachment. By detachment, I mean lack of sync with the project. It may be connected to product owner being unavailable, but basically, if product owner is seeing the game only once per sprint on a review, I think that's pretty weak attachment to the project, and then the product owner can really introduce pretty, maybe not invaluable, but there could be much more value in product owner involvement if he or she would be in sync with the dev team, right? Lack of decisiveness. This is a big point. If you have a product owner that basically is not a decisive person, this is just a waterfall of issues. So first, any questions from the team that are a bit larger than small need to go to a decisive person, right? So product owner starts to be a proxy person that just notes stuff and goes to decisive person, gets answers, gets back, gets feedback on those answers, and all over again, right? So that's a pretty ineffective setup. Last point, and this is kind of towards the scale Scrum. So if you have multiple product owners, multiple teams, this gets trickier. This gets really trickier, because then you need to split your products, split like ownership over the stuff. Then you need to have somebody that basically glues all those teams together, and all product owner decisions. So on that matter, I don't really have a solution, like great solution that works. Usually what I saw was that the teams had really like defined parts of the game that they've been working on, and the product owners were actually like owners of this specific part of the game, right? Then they still had to go to the, let's say, Uber product owner that was kind of a director position and ask and talk and decide, right? Last but mostly crucial, I think, about product owners, so who can actually be product owner in a game dev project? Few options here that you can choose from that at least I saw from my experience is basically you can make a product owner somebody from the dev team, most likely a lead designer, for example. Lead designer seems to be a good person to share his role with a product owner because he has, like, let's say, holistic overview over. Are you shared product owner? Because you laughed. Holistic overview over the game, right? The game has its design, and in terms of the game being a product, there is product design, game design, and this is kind of the core. For example, you can have a shared role of product owner with a producer role, right? Or with a director, C-level. All of those choices that you're going to do potentially have obviously pros and cons. The more you go into sharing product owner role with a director's position or C-level position, the more vision and decisiveness you get, basically, right? Game director does not have to go to anyone to discuss vision and this decision. Obviously, in terms of last call, right? Game directors will discuss with the teams, etc., will work together, but in the end, it's game director's call to do the decision. But availability and sync with project decreases. so there is pros and cons to vary here. In the contrary, if you go into the direction of having product owner near the development team or in the development team, you get more availability, more sync, but then less vision and less decisiveness. So if you're gonna to share product owner role with someone here, something has to suffer, right? At least from my experience, I never saw product owner shared role that the person would do great on both ends. There has to be a trade-off somewhere. Obviously, there is an option, sole role of product owner, but this is really hard to achieve in limited teams or with limited resources, but that will be probably, taking into account all of this, one of the best approaches. And the stakeholders. So I said that stakeholders are really crucial, in my opinion, in whole Scrum implementation and how it works. The problems that I saw with this is basically that you really did not compare expectations versus reality. So stakeholders thought, okay, now we have chaos in development, we will do Scrum, and chaos will be gone. It's cool, let's go with it, right? And then suddenly you tell them, hey, you cannot do changes while we are in the sprint, right? And they're like, what? And they may try to basically desynchronize from the project or just go around, right? If you're not in proper touch. So they're like, okay, teams are working with Scrum, but I'm just going to throw this feedback on my producers and they'll just figure it out, right? So they can try to work in parallel, which is obviously not the thing that you would like to have. Next thing about Scrum, rhythm. Like I said before, all the methodologies have certain rhythm or cadence to choose. And I think that's something that I rarely see in any materials about Scrum. Maybe that's a really lonely opinion, but I think Scrum is a really rigid framework, at least for game development, right? If we read about software development, it is usually presented as very agile methodology, but whenever I saw it implemented in game dev, it was like, in majority of cases, it was not fast enough for the changes. It was not agile enough for the changes. So, rigidity, right, with Scrum. It's basically done via sprints and meetings, right? You have certain intervals, time intervals, that are your sprints. And you have meetings that are also kind of complementary to the rhythm itself. In terms of how the rhythm influences the work, or maybe intensity of the work, what I observed is that basically this curve showing kind of a intensity of work on both planning and development, it works like this. So when we are starting the sprint, everyone is a bit chilled out, a bit tired after the previous review, after pushing stuff for the review, preparing the build, after long planning meeting or review and planning meeting. So things are pretty chilled out at the beginning. Also, in terms of planning, you just finished planning. So now you have a bit of a slack, meaning that you'll most likely go into some backlog cleaning or thinking high-level stuff, etc., because you have quite a lot of time still for the next sprint. Bigger tasks are being started, and those bigger tasks are being merged here, right? More bugs, more merging, pushing stuff to the build to make it work, and also planning, right? You're developing, but at the same time, you have to plan the next sprint, so it gets pretty intense. Changes. You can only actually do big changes here, right? So you can plan and account for those changes here, but ideally, going with the theory, you should not change the sprint scope. Something that I also observed with the rhythm is that if you work in a, let's say, more or less chaotic environment, that you expect the changes to happen and you expect them to happen frequently, you're less surprised and thrown off your work than if you have a very repetitive, rigid rhythm of sprints, and then suddenly, boom, your half of the sprint was just invalidated in the middle of the sprint, right? Then people react to this really, how to say it, more emotionally than they would if the rhythm was not there. And that actually kind of makes sense if we think of our brains and our biology. We like rhythm. We like things that are really rhythmic. So that's something to have in mind. Problems with the rhythm. So problems with the sprints, let's say. Changes to the sprint scope. That's, I would say, common thing in Scrum implementations, that you plan the sprint, you start the sprint, boom, 3 days after it, changes appear. You need to basically drop the tasks that you're doing, introduce new tasks, re-estimate, put them into the sprint. All of this takes time, and all of this also invalidates the future sprint. So it's kind of propagated. Reasons: lack of sync with stakeholders, something that I said. So it's cool that the team has sprints, but me as a game director will just throw the changes because I can, right? And there's actually nothing bad with doing the changes and requesting the changes if they are increasing the value of the product, but you can see you have parallel universes, right? Lack of decisiveness of product owner. If your product owner is not really decisive, he will plan the scope that is more likely to be invalidated very soon because the decisions were not his, right? He had to do this go around and ask for info, ask for stuff. So more things could have gone wrong here. Short-sighted planning. I don't know if any of you have been in this situation that, for example, the only plan that you had was the next sprint, right? Like, there was no plan after. I mean, there was a backlog, but the concrete plan was just, okay, in the next sprint we're doing this, and the X+2 sprint is just more or less defined, but we don't know yet. So this point, from my experience, can be caused by lack of vision of product owner and decisiveness, again, because if you as a product owner have to plan a sprint, and if you have to plan a sprint, you need to have a vision further on, right? If you don't have it, you'll just plan just one step ahead. And this basically brings you to increment issues. So your increments will not be sufficient and significant because you're doing small steps. And the less decisiveness and the less vision holding is on product owner, he'll just look closer, right? If I cannot decide and if I cannot see further on, okay, maybe I can see here or I can decide here. Which sometimes, at least in a few cases that I observed, basically resulted in increments that were very small, which, by the way, then make, for example, stakeholders be like, why the game is not moving forward, right? Meetings, next interesting thing. We all know the meetings. Let's not go into the details. But let's go into the details of time. So what I heard a lot is that Scrum introduces a lot of meetings. And that's the thing, yeah, that's the thing that probably a lot of you heard. So those timings are actual timings from one of the teams from our company that basically was working in 2-week sprints, right? And this can be further optimized. So, for example, just to stop here for a sec, in terms of refinement, you don't have to meet like rigidly on the meeting, everyone from the team at this time. You can assign things to be refined and let people refine them asynchronously, right? And then just sync up. So you can save a lot of time with doing things asynchronously or letting people do things asynchronously. There is too much meetings. That's a quote, direct quote about Scrum. What I actually read from this is there is too much meaningless meetings. Because the person that just said that, I saw this person next day in 1.5 hour meeting, super active and super involved and not having a problem with this meeting being there. So what your team is most likely want to communicate to you is that meetings that they attend to are meaningless. So they're probably not effective. Just to screen quickly here about the meetings themselves, make sure you have a right guest list. Don't involve and invite a lot of people. If you have to invite a lot of people, think if you don't have issues with trust in the team. Because usually, like, the more people you need on the meeting are to just convince you as a product owner or as a manager for the team, as a producer, that, hey, this decision is good, right? Because everyone is here and nobody is raising any complaints. Clear goals, that's probably obvious for you guys, but make sure people know why they are on the meeting, what's their input, and what they get from the meeting, right? What I really like in terms of culture of a company and of the teams is that if you sit on a meeting and after 5 minutes somebody is like, hey, I have no idea why I'm here. Like, can I go and work? That's great. Like, this person just saved you 1 hour of his time and company money. By the way, retrospectively analyze why he was there, obviously. But if you can have this, it's great. So take care of the goals. Email meetings that just obvious, don't do meetings that you need to just check boxes together. You can do this asynchronously. And time, I don't know if you observed this, but there's this funny thing with the Google Calendar that probably majority of you use, that the default meeting is just 1 hour, and you can change it. I guess you can change it only in higher tiers of the Google Sheet. But try and experiment with half an hour meeting or 45 minutes meeting. I would recommend really half an hour. Like, cut all your meetings that you have right now by half and see if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you will make them longer. But I think you'll be surprised how many of them will still work. Because this works in a way that the guests on a meeting, the people that are invited on a meeting, actually know that they have half an hour, so they need to compress, right? And if they know they have an hour, they don't have to. And it's not bad will, it's just how our mind tries to optimize the effort of its own. In terms of effective daily, teamwork. So the less teamwork you have in a team, the less benefit from the daily. For example, you have an artist that work on creating 3D models and you know that you have to create 10 3D models, and it will take a lot of time. So I would encourage you to allow skipping, allow people to skip daily if they don't really have things to include on a daily. And that's, I think this can be, let's say, controversial point, but if you are able to keep them still up to date with a project, but not on a daily basis, I will allow certain people to skip the daily for it to be more effective. And look at the task list at the daily. I had a direct comparison of the daily with the same team with Jira on the TV screen and without Jira on the TV screen. And basically the second daily was always sloppy. Like people were forgetting what they're doing, didn't know what task they are doing, like number of tasks, etc. So have the task list on a TV. In terms of refinement, refinements are basically the things that are preparing us for the planning. So have a clear scope of what you're going to refine. You don't have to refine whole next sprint backlog at once, and assign ownership to people. So for example, give 2 epics to one programmer, 2 epics to different programmer, make them own the estimate, and just do this asynchronously. This can also increase efficiency. In terms of review, stakeholder involvement, that's the first one. If you don't have stakeholder on review, is a huge problem at first, because basically you're working in a void. You don't have feedback of the most important people for the project to proceed and succeed. High level, obviously. You should have working build, in my opinion, as soon as possible in the new teams, or just have it, because first, the game is a game. You want to play it, you want to feel it. A lot of things in games and in game industry are like feelings, right? We are doing stuff and it has to feel right. How do you measure it? That's probably a lot of different talks about it. But the first problem to lose it is if you don't work on a build, on a review. So people cannot play it asynchronously, or you cannot basically evaluate stuff on a build. Team involvement, you can increase this. So it's not like half of the room is sleeping on a review. You can increase this, but basically saying, okay, this half of the team or this person is presenting the feature, right? It's not necessarily that product owner has to present everything. It's different in different teams, but the more team is involved in a presentation, the more they feel connected to it. Last point is try to split. So what we did, for example, when we realized that basically the review is too long and ineffective for our stakeholders, was to do like, okay, so we have 1 hour review, let's cut it in half. First half is we talk about the build, we don't look at Jira, we just see how the game is. And the second part was without stakeholders, mostly production team stuff, so like going through Jira, going through tasks, seeing, okay, why this task didn't get through, etc. So that helped a lot, actually. Last meeting, so planning, good refinement is a first and one of the biggest points to success. I've been to plannings that were 8 hours long, and we didn't yet finish. That was really far away in the time in my first job, but I remember this till day. So you cannot do efficient planning in like 1 hour if you do not prepare for it. And good refinement is the base to be prepared. Skip for efficiency, that's similar with the thing with daily. If you have, for example, artists, like we have a 10 people team and there's 2 artists, why keep them until the end of the sprint, end of the meeting, or somewhere in the middle of the meeting to just plan their stuff? So try to organize it in a way that you plan at the beginning and just let people go if they're not obviously interested in it, right? If you need somebody, keep them, or you can always write on a Slack, hey, you know, by the way, we have an issue that we need you for, and they'll just come over, right? And in the end, if you have problems with planning, if it keeps getting longer, or you're not able to do it in 1 hour or appropriate time for your sprints time, because it obviously can be different. Remember that the most the actually core is that after planning, the team knows where to start. So if your planning fails, if you're deep in, you know what, just make sure that, okay, do you know, guys, where to start? Yeah, everybody knows what to do in 2 days. Okay, so you go back to work, and product owner and needed people will figure out the rest, and we will just reiterate on that. Backlog. That's an obvious thing, again, in terms of theory. Single, prioritize, living list of things to be done for the game. So what problems can we have here? First is many places. So what I find that it works really well is having multiple media in a backlog. So for example, we have a lot of art in Miro. I don't know if any of you is using this tool or something different. We have quite a lot of designs in Google Docs because there is, like, our designers love to write, right? So what we do is we have a lot of places, but we have a single entry point to this, which is the Jira backlog. Everything has to be in Jira backlog, and then in the tasks you have all additional things there. Size, keep it small, like really small. There is only as much issues to handle and possible to be handled. So cut things from the backlog. If you didn't touch something for 3 months, just remove it or put it in an aggregated epic as a bullet point, so it's not a dangling task. You will if you remove it, you will find it, right? No worries. And your work will get much more effective. If it's outdated, it's not a useful backlog, right? That connects to the last point. Backlog is not a thing on its own. Like, backlog does not exist without a project. It's just a state of the project. So if you start to treat it as a thing of its own, it beats the purpose. Last one that is a really, really interesting phenomenon that I saw is that don't get attached to your backlog. Changes will be there. You will have to cut issues, remove issues, probably issues that you just described and created a few days ago. Be really ruthless with the backlog, so you get effective. In terms of estimation, we also know the drill here. We just estimate using the complexity and abstract metric. So what can be the problems? And I will try to focus only on the core ones here, since I guess we don't have a lot of time. So in general, estimating abstract complex things is hard. Try to do estimates not with the whole team. If you have specialized team members, just allow them to estimate. That's your environment. You have one graphics programmer, let other give him thoughts, but he will just estimate. That's the best you can get. Estimating concept arts, R&D work, or unknowns, something that we've used a lot in our teams, is using spikes. So basically, kind of a workaround for an estimate. You're using timebox for the spike, and you say, okay, in following 2 days, we want to get a prototype of something and know how to deal with further implementations, right? So to sum up, how not to suffocate your team with Scrum. First, answer yourself, and here, no BS policy. Like, if you try to convince yourself for something that is not real, then you'll end up in a bad place. So really see the problems, answer how Scrum can help you with the issues you have. Look into alternatives as well, of course. Think of the values. So each of the methodology has its values, and try to think of, like, hey, how we could implement those values in the way we work currently if you don't have Scrum, obviously, right? Maybe you can do adjustments and, like, tailor-made thing for your own that will work more efficiently with less overhead than Scrum. Make team and stakeholders understand benefit and costs. So this brings me to the kind of points about game directors and C-level people being aware of what limitations it brings, mainly limitations to the changes they can do, right? And how frequent they can do this. Then, once established, keep them involved. Do not let to have parallel universe between the team development and the stakeholders or decision makers or vision holders. Analyze your implementation. If you're in Scrum, again, no BS policy, just go through things that are not working, be very straight with yourself, honest with the teams, with stakeholders. This is the only way you can improve, right? And update. So once you get into Scrum, if it's not working, you can get out of it, right? That's something that we forget. We are so attached to the thing we've chosen that we think like, oh my God, now going out of it, it will be just a mess. How we are going to do this? So, for example, in our company at the moment, it was different when I started this talk, but at the moment, all teams are in Kanban. No team is in Scrum because we've analyzed our implementations and where it was lacking and where it was problematic. And we just said, okay, that's not dynamic enough for the state of our projects. That not satisfies, for example, the way we want to introduce changes, amount of prototypes we need to do. And we switched to Kanban. And it was like Monday we were in Scrum, Tuesday we were in Kanban. So it's really easier than you think. Obviously, times the number of people you have in the teams and the company size, but it's really easier, and try to experiment. So that's it. Thank you.